Ladies and gentlemen, this is internet personality Vangelus, and we're taking a look at the second, and apparently ongoing, generation of the Mini Warriors line. Hench is his name, and Brawn is his game. It's also who he's supposed to look like. Hench's vehicle mode is a somewhat squished-looking Jeep thing, much like the Minibot Brawn of days long past. It's boxy and chunky in a lot of the right ways, bearing a pleasant heft that can fill out your palm. The wheels roll well, and the colors are more or less on target for the intended homage. You can even stick the shotgun weapon into a hole atop the immobile spare tire on the roof. This looks, well, incredibly silly, and I really wish there was a better and smoother place to store the weapon other than having it, protrude from the top of the vehicle. Hench, rather surprisingly, uses almost all of the G1 Minibot Brawn's design cues in his transformation, but executes upon them in completely different ways. The main piece of engineering to talk about is contained in the legs, which use a really clever fold-over technique to bulk out and erase potentially wasted panel mass. The downside of this method is that it is very easy to think you're doing things right and end up with everything going a little backwards. You just have to get used to the process and know that there are both waist and knee rotations involved. The rest of the transformation is pretty straightforward and rather quick to do once you get the hang of it. At first glance, Hench's robot mode is a pretty strong representation of Brawn, with good proportions and an inherent strength to its silhouette, but over time it became apparent to me that Hench also has a huge weakness, the entirely immobile front section of his alt mode. This manifests in his backpack and the obscene assembly hanging over his head. To see almost literally the exact same issue I had with Rager on a physically larger scale was rather disappointing. Speaking of scale, the larger size implemented during Hench's development gives him a good heft and stature, but also causes his low number of paint apps and rather simplistic sculpting to stand out in a bad way. Particularly in his chest, Hench kinda looks like he's not meant to be this big. On the bright side, the head sculpt is fantastic, with both a brawny domed shape and Orbot-style underbite. And in a cool touch, you can turn the head around 180 degrees to reveal an alternate battle mask face, which very much resembles the simpler G1 Minibot toy. The only downside to this gimmick is that it can be kind of annoying to actually turn Hench's head, which we'll talk about in greater detail very soon. This shotgun is Hench's sidearm of choice, and it looks great. The silver paint app on the pump brings it to life, even though Hench can't properly grip that part. It looks great in hand and finishes off his look pretty well, despite the fact that his intended homage never really used guns much at all, aside from, getting shot in the shoulder and dying. Coming down the long lineage of Brawn toys, Hench has to beat out 4 points of articulation to take a new crown in the realm of dome-headed strongmen robots, and he does. He's got all 4 points of articulation, and an elbow! As far as his actual posability goes in detail, because that's, what people like to talk about, I'm going to start off with the weak part, which is that these ball joints sometimes are pretty easy to pop out due to their unique mounting system. That said, they're also just as easy to get in, and popping them out tends to come from waving them around back and forth in ways they aren't really meant to go, which is... it's a problem of mine, it's a personality thing. This guy's head, though, is the weak spot of the actual posability, because, much like Rager, this thing is all recessed back inside a cavity, and his head's kind of round, so it's kind of tricky to get a grip on it. It helps that there are these ridges on the sides of his helmet, so you can use a fingernail to kind of push it left and right, but it's bothersome. Doubly so when you want to spin it around to see the battle mask, because you have to do it all from this one side, and it's a colossal hassle. Then you get the battle mask out, and now the thing is sloped back this way even more, so he often ends up permanently looking up. I really wish there was some kind of hinge on this thing so that I could more easily get at his head. This is my least favorite part of the Mini Warriors' sometimes common aesthetic, are these inaccessible heads. Anyway, his shoulders, aside from that ball joint connection, which allows them to go forward and backwards, there's actually a hinge to go in these directions. There's no real room for inward and outward shoulder movement, even if you do move this out of the way. It's mostly backwards, and I don't think it does all that much, because there's such a long stem on the ball joint. His elbows are on ball joints, so there is a... whoops. Hey, what's up, Hench? There is a bicep rotation involved, although you might want to hold on to the bicep while you're doing this. No wrist joint, which bums me out. I thought there was going to be one when I first got this guy, and check it out, there isn't. There is a waist joint, though, partly from the transformation, although in this case I think it's more that there's a waist joint on this toy and then it's worked into the transformation, because it feels way more like a waist joint first and transformation joint second. Ball-jointed hips with a big enough cut to allow full outward movement, a ball-jointed knee, which means there's basically a thigh swivel, and he has kind of limited but useful ankle tilts for his big-ass feet. And these ankle tilts help because there is one problem with this guy. It's not something you would think would be a problem at first glance, but he's got this big backpack, and he's sculpted in a way where he's often kind of leaning back in most natural stances when you just lay him down on the table. That means it's really easy to have him leaning back, and he kind of just topples over due to his hunch. Hench's hunch, if you will. You can counterweight him with his gun pretty easily, and if you get to know how his posability works, it's easier to find his point of balance, but it did take me a little while, and it's just it's tricky. On the bright side, his big feet do mean that if you get really used to his balance, you can actually figure out ways to stand him on one leg because he's got a big enough base, or into these kind of like walking poses where he's got one foot on the ground and kind of one touching the ground. And it helps that they are so wide because even when they're touching the ground, there's this long ridge touching the ground. So it balances him pretty well even when you start hammering on the table. But if you do that, then he'll fall over. Oh, poor Hench. Also, he's durable. Tetrajet chest. Chest? Tetrajet test! Oh, you're screwing me up. You're screwing me up, Hench. So the dude's okay. He's posable enough. I find it a little bit annoying how he's able to tip backwards at the most inopportune moments, but he's also the most posable toy of a robot with a dome-shaped head who's supposed to be strong that we've had in a while. So he does have that going for him, and he's able to... he's able to kind of BS holding his shotgun with two hands because... You can slip this one in here and that one like that, and hey, check it out. He's holding his shotgun all proper-like. Good on you, Braun. Hench. Stay. Okay. Anyway, on to my final thoughts. Hench is a pretty fun entry in the Mini Warriors line, but I cannot help but wonder if I would have liked him more at his original Rager-sized scale. I say original, it's actually a bit unclear if he was ever physically prototyped that small before the decision to upsize both him and UFO. But I've found that Hench feels like an upscaled toy in both his sculpt and his transformation. Many of his details feel blown up, and his simple conversion feels under-engineered for his size. And when I imagine how much he would have been enhanced by having some collapsibility in the immobile front chunk of his vehicle mode, his increased price feels like it's paid for size alone. Hench is a great little figure whose upscaling hasn't done him many favors, and between his cranial enclosure and spotty center of balance, I unfortunately found him a bit disappointing despite how many of his qualities rub me the right way. I like messing with this figure, but I also keep sitting here and wondering how things could have gone a bit differently. Anyway, this has been Internet Personality Vangelus, and it would be remiss of me to only look at one half of the size transitional 2012 wave of the Mini Warriors. There's something in the sky. Like a twinkle in your eye.